Hello, all, and welcome to the Fantasy and Sci-Fi Fanatics podcast. I'm your host, Daniel Coolbaugh. Today, I have me a very special guest, Angela Henry. Angela, how are you doing today?
I'm doing great. How are you?
Oh, excellent, excellent. I'm so glad that we could rearrange and get you in. My wife's like, she knows I always get very anxious when I have to do that with authors. I'm like, because I have like certain things that I think about through the week. Sometimes I arrange people for interviews in terms of how I'm thinking about my writing week. So there's some questions I wanted to ask you in particular. She's like, is that going to mess you up, like doing it early in the week? I'm like, no, that's okay. I'm really interested in mysteries and thrillers, and I haven't gotten yet too many people who have been interested in the same type of writing. So I'm really interested to pick your brain today. So thank you so much for coming.
Thank you for having me.
Yeah, anytime, anytime. And we'll go right in with that first question. What has your writing journey been like up until this point?
My writing journey has been kind of all over the place. So I started back in the dark ages, which was the 90s. Before everything was online, and if you wanted an agent, you had to query people in New York because if your agent wasn't in New York, they weren't worth anything. I took 4 years to write my first book, which was the first book in my mystery series, my Kendra Clayton mystery series. I was fortunate enough to get an agent in my first round of query letters because that was back before email and the internet and all of that. You had to go get a book from the library called the Literary Marketplace. It's like a couple $100 book, so everyone would just get it from the library. It would list agents, who they represented, what their query guidelines were like. So I made a list of like 12, and I was able to get a literary agent from a prominent agency in that first batch. But unfortunately, after about a year and a half, she still wasn't able to sell my book. I don't think she was really interested in representing me. I found out later that the agency that she worked for, they all acquired clients by committee, so everyone had to agree. And she was a low person on the totem pole, so I think she got me. And I don't think she was particularly interested. She ended up ghosting me, and to this day, I have no idea what happened to her. But then I was able to, a couple of years later, sell that book myself to another publisher. Previously to that, I got impatient, as authors do. I wanted
That's
to be
fair.
published. Self-publishing wasn't viable back then. If you wanted to self-publish a book, people looked at you, it was the last act of the desperate and untalented. So I unfortunately hooked up with the vanity press that published the book. It was terrible. There was no editing. I think there was like a typo in the first paragraph.
Oh,
The
wow.
cover was horrible. There was no distribution. So, that was a lesson learned. So fortunately, I was able to get my rights back from that vanity press. I was able to sell that book myself to another publisher. They offered me a 3-book deal. Book one, and by the time book two came out, they had been acquired by a larger publisher. So after I was offered a second 3-book deal, I was a little worried about it, but when they offered me the second 3-book deal, I thought, oh, well, this is going to be okay. I won't mention the publisher, but they were acquired by a much larger romance publisher. And they got rid of all their mystery writers, including me. So my second 3-book contract was canceled. Excuse me. And that's when I pretty much decided I'm just going to self-publish this series, try and place other books with a traditional publisher, but I decided just to hold on to the rights to my mystery series, and I'm up to book 6 now.
Oh, wow.
So I created my own publishing company, Boulevard West Press, to publish that. So in the meantime, I had written books outside of that series. One was called The Paris Secret, which was a kind of a paranormal thriller. That was placed with a different division. It was called Carina Press. It was a digital first press. Those were starting to pop up all over the place. So I was able to get some other books placed with traditional publishers, but I just didn't have a great experience working with a publisher. They have a particular business model, different from indie, and traditional publishers, they give you a very low royalty rate. They edit your book. You'll get a cover and all of that, so you don't have to worry about any of that, but you get a very low royalty rate. And the thing that I don't like about traditional publishing, digital presses are better, but traditional publishers, their job is to sell your book to retailers, bookstores, online retailers, libraries. There's no direct to consumer relationship built between a traditional publisher and readers. Now, that's why a lot of indie authors are able to thrive, because they're directly able to create that communication, that relationship, directly to their readers. And that's something that I think traditional publishers still have a long way to go on. So I decided to go the complete indie route. If I do ever write for another publisher, it will be a digital press. It won't be traditional publisher, because people don't realize, when you go the traditional route, they pay you in advance up front, but until you earn back that advance, you don't get a dime in royalties. And a lot of people don't realize that.
Yeah.
And if you don't earn back your advance, you're kind of considered damaged goods, and they probably won't buy another book from you. So right now I'm fully indie. So I kind of came full circle, from wanting to be traditionally published back to, doing my own thing.
Yeah. That's so interesting. You said so much there. I'm going to have to go back and listen to it too, because I like to study the industry in general. Like, I had went to a really cool interview with like a live interview at a book signing with like Kevin Hearn, Brian McKellen when he first came out. Brandon Sanderson had just written Way of Kings. It hadn't even I think it was out like a week. So it wasn't really like a thing yet. Patrick Rothfuss was in The Name of the Wind. I had no idea who he was. I just thought his book looked cool. There were quite a few people there from India as well. And it was so interesting to see. This is about 9 years ago. For me, it's so interesting to see where some of them were compared to now. I mean, it's astronomical. And some of them, like Brandon I always called it the Brandon Sanderson method, who, he's so hybrid now, and a lot of people like Kevin J. Anderson, do the same thing, where it's like, they're just not, someone like Kevin J. Anderson, it's like, of Star Wars fame, you just assume that he's going to get a high royalty check, like they used to, but he's like, yeah, they don't do that anymore, even for someone like me. And I just think it's interesting that you said that, because I just think a lot of people think they're still going to get it. Maybe they do, but I feel like it's very rare nowadays that even if you're an established veteran, who is going to sell a lot of books, or,
Right.
really well, it's like they're not even getting a big royalty check.
Well, and the traditional model works very well for some authors, but it's kind of, a few and far between. Most authors are what's called mid-list. And, they're not earning their living from writing. It's probably a side hustle, or they probably still have a day job. And that was me. I'm retired now, so that's the only reason why I'm a full-time writer. But yeah, the traditional model, the great thing about being published now is you can go about it in so many different ways. You can be traditionally published and still self-publish. You can be hybrid. You can do online serials. You can do pretty much whatever you want now. And, when I first started out, it was, this is the only way you're ever going to be published. And if you don't do it this way, then you'll never be published. And another thing that you learn very quickly when you're trying to go the traditional route is that your book can be rejected for reasons that have absolutely nothing to do with the quality of your writing. If the marketing department can't figure out how to market it, if it's too cross-genre, they're going to be like, no, sorry. If they have a book similar to yours that didn't do well, then again, it's no. If it's going to too closely compete with something that they already have out there, it's going to be a no. So, and then, as an author, you just take all that rejection to heart, and you think you're not good enough. And yeah, I mean, there's all different ways now, and that wasn't the way when I first started.
I just think it's interesting that you mentioned that. I just feel like the Golden Compass, is like His Dark Materials are, just a great example of, like, you go into a bookstore, a used bookstore, and that book can be in 5 different genres, and it's interesting to me that one was traditionally published. I think if it was, you know, a different year, a different publisher, they probably wouldn't have done that. That one wouldn't, like, he wouldn't have done so well, you know, and it's interesting. And I try to, you know, point that out a lot on here just to show people like, you know, this person today probably would have had to have gone indie or something at a different time period. So sometimes I think you're right. I think it's timing, you
Yeah,
know.
luck and timing also plays into it.
Yeah, I do think, I do definitely agree with you. I think so many authors take it to heart and, you know, take it to, like, I just tried to talk down. I say, like, you know, one of those authors was like, oh, I looked at her blurbs, I looked at her books. I'm like, they sound fantastic. I said, I haven't seen you. I said, I look under rocks for people. I'm like, I'm all over TikTok, whatever. I said, I think that's just the problem. I said, is just, you know, you're whatever's going on, you're just not able to find your audience. And I feel like I've had that talk this year in particular with more and more people. And I'm like, you know, and I'll read something of theirs or I'll look at the blurb or something. I'm like, everything looks great, you know, and everything looks interesting. They have great cover art. I'm like, you know, it's just, I think it's what, 10,000 books a day are published on Amazon. So I think the hardest thing is just, you know, finding your audience and, you know, at this point, getting it out there. But you're totally right. There's so many different ways, you know. I think if something's not working, try to mix it up. I knew somebody that was, you know, only on Kindle and was terrified of going wide because that was all of his income. But then he went wide and, you know, he ended up doing really, really well. So
Yeah, I was in um, Kindle Unlimited for probably a decade.
oh wow.
And I was afraid to,
Oh,
go
for sure.
wide.
Yeah.
Beginning of the year, I'm like, I heard too many horror stories about authors losing their accounts for whatever reason. And I'm like, it's not really financially viable anymore to put all your eggs in one basket. So
Yeah.
at least for me, I mean, KU works really well for a lot of authors.
Yeah.
So I pulled all my stuff out and I went wide, and I have not regretted it.
Oh, that's interesting. I'm gonna have to make a note of that because I'm trying to see different people who have done that and try to see what some of the. I just find that interesting because like you said, like some people, you know, it doesn't work for. Some people it does, and that to me that's always interesting, you know, to see. But yeah, I definitely think you're right. I think it's a gamble, right? Because you're like, well, here's my income. It's
Yeah.
got to.
Well,
I imagine it's got to be pretty scary.
Well, and then another thing, as an author, you have to think about your readers. I've had so many readers say, are your books ever going to be available on Barnes and Noble for
Mm.
Nook? I have a Nook. And that was kind of another deciding factor. I want to make my work available for, whoever, if you're on Kobo, if you're on Nook, or what have you, you're going to be able to read my books if you want to. So.
I feel like that's very fair. It's just funny because I've talked to several authors about that recently, and they're like, "Oh yeah, I'm not sure this and that." I'm like, "Yeah," I'm like, "I don't know." I'm like, I just feel personally like I feel like I would try it. You know, you can always switch it back. Obviously,
Yeah. Mm-hmm.
like you said, right? Some people really dips it. I think you have to be ready for like a roller coaster. Like it's gonna dip, and it's
Mm-hmm.
either gonna start to climb and get better, or it's not, and then you have to go back. But I do
Yeah.
understand, you know, having that feeling that it feels like you're going backwards. But
Yeah, I'm giving it a year. So, like you said, you can always go back.
yeah, that seems to be what most people are doing now that I've talked to, like 10 to 12 months seems to be like their thing. But I knew a guy that, you know, he was at 11 and a half months. His wife went and did the same thing. She blew up, and then he waited almost a year and he was just like, I can't do it anymore. And he went back into Kindle Unlimited. And then his next book, he saw how well she was doing. He decided he was going to go wide, and he just stuck it out. And it took about a year. But after that, I mean, he really just picked up traction. So it is very interesting, though, to see, you know, what different people have done. And yeah, I feel like never count yourself out, you know?
Right.
So interesting. It's an interesting thing to do. So for that second one, so what genre or genres do you currently write in?
I write in mystery, amateur sleuth mystery. I have one thriller, and then I have my urban fantasy detective series, which is Night's Fall and Nightshade.
It looks so cool. I think that's what really caught my eye was like, you must have shared at some point. I think it was a little bit, I don't think it was like a recent TikTok. But I was like, what is that book? I like immediately like put it on my wish list. I can't stand now that on my Android, I can't just buy Kindle books because I have to like add a wish list now. And then I have to remember, like, when I get paid this week, like I got to go back through the wish list, you know, and go back through. But it was kind of fun the other day because I was going through and I was like buying certain books and stuff. So you're on my list for Friday. So I'm like really, really excited about that. but yeah, I was like, this sounds cool. It looks really cool. Cover was absolutely amazing. Like absolutely blew my mind. Reminded me of, oh, we had this like storyteller that would come around and he would act out his stories. And the guy was, I never thought about it, but he was an amazing writer. And he looks just like your character. And even like facial expressions. And I was just like, it took me, I felt like I was a kid again at the library listening to, his, he did like an early, like young adult, like urban fantasy tale and stuff. And he wasn't like a detective, but it was very similar. So it was really cool. It was very, very nostalgic for me. So yeah, but that was really neat. So what is your Xavier Knight series about and how did you come up with this idea?
Okay, so Xavier Knight is a fallen angel. He was kicked out of heaven. Um, he thinks it's because of a romance he had with a human woman that caused another one of his charges, because he's a guardian angel, to die. And then he finds out that that's not really why he lost his wings. And it's going to be like, I think the TikTok you saw, I said that Burn Notice, the show Burn
Yeah,
Notice,
that's the one. Yep.
was probably the biggest inspiration for Knight's Fall, because I love that show. And Michael Weston was a spy who got burned. I think what the tagline was, spies don't get fired, they get burned.
Yeah.
So, my whole thing was angels don't get fired, they get clipped. So over the course of the books, I'm only up to book 2, he's going to find out the real reason why, just like Michael Weston through the whole series finds out, he's helping other people on the side, but his main motivation is trying to find out who burned him. So that's the same thing with Xavier. He's in New Orleans, kind of solving supernatural crimes. He's a loner. He's grumpy. He's antisocial. But his first big case, he's going to have to save the world. So he's got to kind of rely on people in a way that he hadn't been used to since he fell to earth. So the first book is about a supernatural drug, a threat to humanity with a supernatural drug. The second book is it takes place a month later, and he's trying to find a woman's missing sister. So, but yeah, they're fun books to write. I got the idea to set it in New Orleans. I'm a retired librarian, and we had our annual convention in New Orleans, like the year after Katrina.
Oh, wow.
And, I just went and, I like to think that New Orleans is just another character in the book, because the city is just, I don't know if you've ever been, it's just so atmospheric, so much history there. So I was like, it would be great to set a book here. So that's when I decided, the Xavier Knight series will be set in New Orleans.
Oh, that's so cool. I'm just a huge fan of, I haven't gotten to go to New Orleans. My wife went there with some friends for a bachelorette party. And I told her, I was like, I'm so jealous. Like as a history teacher, I'm like, that's one place that I always have wanted to go. And haven't been to Louisiana yet. So it's on our list really soon. But one of my favorite characters from the Valiant comic universe, Shadow Man, is from there and has ancestors there for a very long time, and like Creole background and just like the coolest mythology. So when I saw New Orleans, I was like sold, because I have so many characters that I love from that spot. The Cloak and Dagger series for Freeform, they're from New Orleans. And yeah, I just feel like you said, New Orleans itself is, I feel like just as a city in terms of our country, is a very, it is its own character. And I think it's cool when you can find a setting, or a city that becomes its own character, because I feel like, your world building just, it adds a lot to it. So yeah, that was the other thing. I was just like, cover. I went, all right, Fallen Angel. I was now outside of New Orleans. I was like, sold. That's super cool. Yeah, I love Burn Notice. That was definitely the TikTok. I love Burn Notice. So I thought that was such a good use of free advertising by you personally, because I'm one of those people, like I love Michael Weston. I work with kids, and I'm like that, like don't hurt it. Like I always loved his character, because like he's always very gruff or whatever, and yeah, he helps people, but then he's got those redeeming qualities of like never hurt a kid near him, because then you'll just be
Right.
screwed kind of thing. And
Right.
always connected with him and, the other characters. I like to, Phoebe and, Sam and all them. So I just was like, I have to now watch the rest of this TikTok. So you got me thinking, like what kind of shows, like do I like that have inspired me? Like, could I do something like that? So I thought that was really cool. Oh, I know, I was going to ask you. So did you start writing your mysteries and thrillers first, or your urban fantasy?
I started out with my mystery.
That's what I
My
thought.
mystery series. So I have a mystery series. It's the Kendra Clayton mystery series. It's set in a small town in Ohio. They're not cozies. They're traditional mysteries. They have, cussing and all that in them. And I'm up to book 6 on that one. And that's the series that I started, and I'm still writing that. I didn't write the first Xavier book came out from, so this was the journey with the Xavier book. I wrote Night's Fall. I had a couple of publishers that were kind of interested in it, but we could never come to terms on the contract. I wasn't represented by an agent, but if you're a member of I think it's the Writers Guild, they have a free service where a lawyer will look over your contract for you and give you. And I had a lawyer look over the contract from, I'm not going to say the publisher. This is a publisher that was created by an author, a popular author, and I'm not going to say what it is because I think they're still in business, but the contract was horrible. And she red flagged so much stuff. And I kept trying to work with them. And then finally they're just like, well, we're just going to have to pass. And I'm like, well, okay, I tried. So obviously this isn't the place for Night's Fall. So then I don't know if you remember, Kindle had a contest where, oh gosh, what was it called? I can't even remember what it was called now, but it was kind of like American Idol for books.
Oh yeah. Oh
yeah.
I just talked to another author who was in that. I know what you're talking about. I'm totally blanking on what it's called.
And I got enough votes that they published, and they had a publishing company called Kindle Press. It's defunct now. It's not. Yeah. So that's how Night's Fall became published through Kindle Press. Then when they started to, they kind of dissolved and they weren't doing it anymore, I asked for my rights back, and then I published it, with a different cover. And so it came out Night's Fall came out in 2015. So it's an older book.
Yeah.
Who's kind of found a little bit of traction on TikTok. TikTok has been amazing for authors.
Yeah.
And I found a whole new audience for Night's Fall through TikTok. But, there was a 5-year gap between book 1 and book 2 because I was writing, my other series too. So the second book, Nightshade, it just came out in February. So I'm hoping now that I'm retired and I have more time to write, I can, get rid of those big gaps between books.
Well, I do think 2015, I mean, that was just I feel like that was such a hard year too for urban fantasy. I mean, you had certain Dresden books were coming out, Briggs, Patricia Briggs. I felt like it was, like those years before, it was like, it's picking up traction as urban fantasy was picking up traction. You had like Kevin Hurd and things like that. But then even some of those people that I was looking at, I was talking to actually, Shauna McGuire I had on for season 1. So I was talking to her, and, she said like, she wasn't quite sure, at that time, like she thought maybe, and Faith Hunter, I saw an article said she thought maybe she was done at that point with that character. And then all of a sudden, like it started to pick up traction. I think it's because the movies started to stop doing, so many things. And so some of the sci-fi shows, alphas and things like that were starting to be done, and people were starting to look for an audience again. But I definitely was seeing a lot of different things with the urban fantasy market. So, but now I feel like, we have less of those things now, in terms of television shows and stuff. Supernatural is still there, obviously, but I think now, you're getting some of those other readers, some of those people like myself who are nostalgic for early Supernatural days, or, Jim, but whatever, in urban fantasy, or Patricia Briggs. And I think you have some of these younger readers coming in too. So yeah, that's really interesting though. Yeah. I'm glad that TikTok's been been working for you. And
Yeah,
I always teach
yeah.
people, like, it's working for me too, because I have found a lot of books such as yours that I'm just like, my wife's like, are you still on TikTok? I'm like, I am not finding books on TikTok. I promise you. So hopefully now that we're in season 2, she stopped watching all these, because she's gonna like come in here and be like, I thought you were done buying books. But yeah, we have this thing where, like, like I love Kindle now, because it's like I can just pick up people that I had on the podcast, instantly, and and read and then review. I just feel like it really has made things so much easier. But I always call TikTok and Twitter like my watering hole. I'm just like waiting there for an author to come by, and then I like throw the bait out there, and try and get them on. So it's been very, very nice. I think you're the 5th person on TikTok I've had in the last like 2 weeks. So
Oh,
in
that's cool.
particular, this year in particular, I think I've had like 20 authors from TikTok that I found just literally within the last maybe like 7 or 8 weeks. So I just got out of TikTok recently. And now I'm like addicted to all the book talk stuff. So for that 4th one, how did you go about your world building process?
I didn't really have a world building process in place when I started writing the book. I had a vague idea of who Xavier was, where he came from, what his journey was going to be like. And then the other supernatural elements just kind of fell into place as I was writing. I see other authors and their processes with their world building, and they have, sticky notes and big, whiteboards, and,
Guilty.
there's this whole, mythology behind, what they're writing. And I just don't, that's not part of my process. It's kind of just as I go along, if it feels right for the plot, I'll plug something in. So I don't have any kind of, I guess all that to say, I don't have a really complicated world building process when I write. It just kind of comes to me.
Yeah. Well, now this is the second part of my question. Do you feel that you just had so much of the, like the mystery and the thriller background, that, because I consider like, mysteries and thrillers in particular to have like their own world building, or set situations, or, certain tropes and things like that. I just was curious, do you think that just coming with that background and him being a detective, that you maybe already had a lot of those,
Well,
mysterious
yeah. Yeah,
elements?
now that I think about it, and you mention it, yeah. Yeah, the mystery element was probably as important as the paranormal element. And that's my thing, that's what I write. So I think once that all that was in place, all the supernatural stuff just kind of fell into place too.
Yeah, yeah. I just always find it interesting to ask people that, like yourself, who have the mystery thriller background, because like I have certain characters that for urban fantasy that I'm trying to write, and I would love to do something like your book. I don't have the mystery or thriller background, so I'm trying to study those types of writing. But right now, I've been reading a couple of books that talk about like about the things that you need for your genre, and I think that's why what people like so much about like, like your book, Dresden Files, even like Briggs, like I do find it interesting to step outside of your typical urban fantasy. And I like having different elements like mystery, I like them having to solve it. I like almost where like the urban fantasy stuff, you don't really notice it as much because you're trying to solve a crime or a mystery, or figure it out. I just think it's just so much nicer with reading so much fantasy that you just get something a little different. I also like the horror genre when it's in with, fantasy as well. Richard Lee Byers does a lot of that. Anna Stevens, I talked to her yesterday. She does that. I always like stuff like that. So I think, like urban fantasy is just cool when you can add, a mystery or thriller in there, because I think it just adds a lot of flavor to urban fantasy just in general. So
Mhm.
I was curious, because a couple people I had on that I asked the same question, they were, talking about that and saying, well, I already came in with like 65% of this, mystery or thriller background and its own world building and, the things you have to do. And one author said that he just kind of sprinkled urban fantasy stuff in, around his character. Like instead of going to talk to this person who's a human, they talked to them and they were like like a vampire or something like that. And
Yeah, exactly. Yeah,
yeah.
I have that in both those books.
Oh, cool.
He's investigating, um, and the person he has to go to for information isn't human.
Oh, cool.
So yeah, and that's those kind of things are easy to do. I
Yeah,
think maybe if I was just doing straight urban fantasy, that might be maybe a little harder, but when
yeah,
you got the mystery structure in place and he's already going to talk to people or finding evidence, it's easy to swap out
yeah.
a human with, a shifter or something like
Yeah,
that.
yeah, yeah. That's where I was thinking like, I was like, maybe I'll just like go study mystery because I have always thought like I've always really enjoyed mysteries. I grew up reading Boxcar Children, Hardy Boys, and then like adult stuff. I love Lee Child, things like that. So I'm like, well, I was like, maybe it make it a little bit easier for me, but I like to study structure and stuff. But yeah, I think I give you guys credit because I don't think I have a mystery mind. I love mysteries, but I don't think I necessarily have like a mystery writing mind. So I feel like I have to kind of build up to it. But yeah, I give you guys credit because I'm always like, how do you figure out this and that and then put that in there, and make it interesting. So
Right.
I think that's why people like mysteries and thrillers so much. I think I personally think it's a more complicated form of writing. And then once you have it down, I think the blueprint, like you said, I think the blueprint matches a little bit. It's a little bit better. I think fantasy sometimes there's almost how I rate at least think there's almost too much to do. So then it's hard for me, to figure out exactly where I want them to go or who they, like you said, like who they want to talk to and things like that. But I think definitely more people studying, different writing styles or structures, that will definitely help for their own writing. But yeah, that's super cool. Okay, so you are an author of several different mystery and thriller series. And how do you go about planning a mystery or a thriller?
Well, usually I'll have a general idea and then I'll write like a chapter outline of everything that's supposed to happen in each chapter, just so I can get started writing because I don't always stick to it 100%. The end product usually ends up being 75% to 80% of what I wrote because, things change
Oh
all
yeah.
the time. But, like I'll get an idea like I did with, Burn Notice for Night's Fall and I'll start kind of tossing ideas around in my head like you know why did he get clipped, what's he going to do, um, and then just kind of write it up just so I can get started because like I said things will change. I know, um, I'm a plotter so it has to be plotted out
Yeah.
before I can start writing. So what I always know is how it's going to start and how it's going to end. But getting from the beginning to that ending is a whole nother journey. So, and I have to plot it all out.
Yeah.
Because the first time I tried to pants a book, it took 4 years to write. So yeah.
Which is actually pretty quick compared to other pantsers. I don't want to point fingers at anybody or anything. Yeah, we were just talking about that with another person that like last week that I talked to privately on Twitter and stuff. And I told him I was like, he's like, how's draft 2 of your fantasy novel coming? I was like, I don't want to talk about it. He goes, I bet you the next one you're gonna really plot things out, right? I said, oh, instead of spending like 14 years writing, I said I'm gonna spend like 14 months plotting this thing out and I want to know who sneezes in what chapter, or things like that. But yeah, I think that's the problem with myself is I'm not the best plotter. So I think that's where, when I want to do a mystery, I'm like, well, I don't know, what's going to happen here and there. So I think that's personally when I'm looking recently, I think that's my downfall more. So I definitely think
Well,
if any of our
and
audiences have the same
I
problem.
don't feel like I have to know every single thing. I have to have a vague
Yeah.
idea of what's going to happen. I don't have to know every single thing because it's always going to
Oh
change.
yeah. Yeah. Well, I felt like at this time I did a pretty good job though. Yeah, I went and I was like, okay, I got this, and then I like was actually able to do chapter by chapter. And like you said, I had a lot changed, but it was nice. I felt like it was more concise. I felt like I was halfway there from being, a plotter now. So definitely picking up some speed. So do you find that writing mysteries and thrillers helps your writing urban fantasy stories?
Well, yeah, like we said, I already had that structure in place, that mystery structure in place. So then I just, like the other author you interviewed said, sprinkled the the paranormal stuff in there. Um, but I think any kind of book that you write is going to put you in a good place to write whatever
True.
whatever it is you want to write, especially if you're an avid reader in that particular genre. So I think just writing in general, no matter what the genre. So yeah, it definitely does help.
Yeah. So like my next little add-on to that question would be, what do you think do you think it's more interesting at time writing urban fantasy mysteries because you can add those different elements? I just was curious about
Yeah,
that.
I have a lot of fun writing the Xavier Knight series because of that. You can, it's your world building. So you're building this world, and regular rules don't apply. You can make up your own rules. That's the best part about it. You're building something where, you know, your system of justice could be different than what it is in real life, or laws can be different. Just, you can do anything you want, and
Yeah.
it's great.
I just see like as soon as I saw your blurb and it said that he was a fallen angel, my writer mind just went crazy because I just thought of all the cool things, like, because I thought, well, they probably have some sort of different type of justice system, if he's being kicked out. And I thought just all the world building things or just the urban fantasy things just started to spring to mind. And I was like, oh, that's just got to be
Well,
cool, like
one of the
backgrounds and things like.
right. One of the coolest scenes, or my favorite scenes that I wrote, is what happened to Xavier. He was kicked out, he fell, he lands. What happens to him after he lands? He lands in an alley in New Orleans, and it's like, what happens to him? Because, he's no longer an angel, he's human now. And what's the process that happens from the time he lands until, the aftermath of him leaving that alley and how he leaves that alley? That was probably the funnest thing I've ever written, because you have to really draw on your imagination
Yeah.
of, okay, so what was his life like when he was an angel, and how is that going to change now that he's human? And what was that process? Because it involves some pain.
Yeah.
So yeah, that was one of the funnest things. And, I just made that up, completely. And you can do that in urban fantasy. I
Yeah.
mean, unless you're following like folklore, you know,
Yeah.
there's rules there that, people are going to ding you on. No, that's not, the way, this story goes or whatever. But, any other thing, you can just kind of throw the kitchen sink in there, everything but the kitchen sink, and you can just do whatever you want. And that's just the appeal of the urban fantasy.
Yeah. Yeah. No, I agree.
As long as you make the world make sense. I
Yeah.
mean, it
Yeah.
has to, there has to be
Yeah.
some sense involved there. It can't just be completely, you have to
Got it.
make the magical world, your system of
Yeah.
the magical system, make sense.
I just laugh so hard because I'm in book 8 of Malazan, Book of the Fallen, and Steven Erikson, like, we're like, okay, the magic system's this way, and this is how people react, and this and that. And then he just completely changed something in book 8. And I'm like, I had to stop reading for like a day. I was so mad. I was like, no, we just read like 7 books that it's this way. And, and now all of a sudden it's this thing, it's like we just turned gravity on its head. So it definitely I got back in, but it threw me out for a minute. And when we were book club, and I was like, you can't do that. You can't do that. Like I said, Brandon Sanderson said that you can't switch rules like that. So clearly you can't do that. But yeah, I feel it, right. As long as you're being consistent with those rules, right, it definitely makes sense. But that always drives me nuts when you get a character who you're like, oh yeah, they're done with their spells or whatever. And then all of a sudden they just dig deeper and then do the thing. And you're like, well, wait a minute. Like, seems like kind of like the writer's trying to get out of a writing scenario or something.
Yeah, and if you're going to do that, you better explain it
Yeah.
very well, and it
Yeah.
better make sense.
Better be a really good
It's
plot
gonna be
hole.
bad.
Yeah. Yeah, totally. And I think that's why, I think that's why certain characters always stick with me, because I'm like, I like the authors that stick to those things. Like, I like Patricia Briggs because it's like Mercy. You clearly can tell there's something funky about her, and she's either more lucky than other people or something, but it's not like she's like she's still a human. It's not like she all of a sudden gets super strength or something and then tears everybody apart. It seems like she just squeaks by, barely surviving these stories, and you're just kind of contribute it to luck. Whereas now I'm deep enough in the book where I'm like, maybe it's a little bit more than luck, but it's not like glaringly obvious, or but it also seems like she's sticking to a consistent plot that's building over time, like an overarching plot. But I've seen some people just plow through and just do whatever, and I don't get through very many of their books that way. But
well, I will say one thing: unless you keep consistent notes or you have a series Bible, sometimes it's you throw stuff in there and then you have to go back. Oh, I can't do it this way because I set it up this way back in book 3. I can't change it in book 6. So sometimes it's hard to remember. You got to keep track of all of that.
Yeah. No, that makes total sense. Yeah. I know Robert Jordan's had like 1,400 pages or something, like something crazy. But yeah, that's definitely a good idea. I've been collecting notes myself, and I definitely encourage anybody in the audience, if you're writing, to definitely do that. It definitely helps with consistency. This is definitely one I want to ask you. So if your future author self came back to tell you one thing, what would you want it to be?
Start writing sooner.
Oh, that's a good one.
I didn't start writing my first novel until I was in my late 20s. I wish I had started 10 years earlier.
Yeah.
Yeah. And, looking back, I'm not even really sure. I don't know if it was fear or lack of confidence or what it was and why I started when I started. But if I had to go back and tell myself something, it would definitely be start writing sooner.
I definitely agree with that. I definitely agree. I think that, I just think that's, I think now just recently people are like, oh yeah, you can do that because they see all these indie publishers do it, and it's like Roger Bannister, the first person that ever broke the 4-minute mile barrier. It's like nobody did it up until that time. They didn't think it could be done, so they didn't do it. But then once he did it, thousands of people, including high school kids, have broken it. And well, what's the difference? They know it's been done. I think now with indie publishing, people are like, oh, I know somebody that wrote a book, or my friend wrote a book, or my mom wrote a book or something, so I think now it's like the barriers are really coming down, and you don't, like you said earlier, like you don't need to wait on these publishers if you don't want to. You can literally just put out a product, good or bad, and and you can put it out. So I think now just people seeing that more, I think it is making people be like, oh, I can do this. But I do agree with that. I just think that it was hard, in the past, particularly 90s and 2000s, like you said, with traditional publishing. I think a lot of people just didn't feel like it could be done. I was like still writing stuff, but I didn't even bother to submit, and now I'm like kicking myself, like, yeah, that's a good one. That's definitely mine as well. So I can definitely understand that feeling. Do you have any promos, current projects, news, updates, anything like that you'd like to share with us?
I'm in the process of getting all my books in audio.
Oh, that's awesome.
Yeah. I have a lot of people that ask, I'd read this, but I only listen to audiobooks, and I listen to audiobooks a lot too. So I'm in the process of trying to do that. And just, hopefully I'll have another Xavier book out, maybe possibly early next year.
Oh, cool.
So yeah, every once in a while I'll do, if people join my newsletter, they'll find out about sales, like promotions and things that I have, because I do those. I'm usually in one of those, some kind of promotion every month. So you can get one or more of my books for free or discounted.
Oh, awesome.
Yeah.
Well, audiobooks are, I had a friend who we had on the podcast like twice, and her next book's about to come out, so I'll have her here in the fall. And I just saw that she sold 50,000 audiobooks recently.
Oh my gosh.
You got to think, right? Like she was struggling, with book 2. And, she had just gotten book 2 done. And then she was like, oh, I talked to her privately before our interview. She said, Dan, I just don't know about this. Like, I don't know if I'm, doing the right thing. I said, please do not stop. I'm like, you just have to find your audience. I'm like, you're only, on book 2. And it's not even out yet. I said, when you publish book 2, I said, I really think that, people see that. I said, I think they'll really start to flock. And, so she was just like, yeah, I'm just going to do this thing. If I'm going to do it, I'm going to do it. And then, I couldn't believe it. I just felt so happy for her, because I just remember us.
Yeah, I love hearing stories like that.
Yeah. That's why I do the podcast. Yeah, I'm hoping like one time, like so if anybody in the audience wants to just share for Angela here, I just want one time for somebody to be like, oh, Dan, you're up to like 1 million views. Cause I just know that's going to help somebody with sales. Like I will feel so accomplished if it just happens one time. So yeah, I was like, oh, I just felt really good there. I was like, oh,
Well, and people are looking for stuff to read. Some of the TikToks that I do that are get the most views are when I'm recommending other people's books
yeah.
and recommending other authors. People are just so readers are so hungry for
Yeah.
books to read. So yeah,
And
yeah.
then you got book dragons like me that love buying them and then are too busy writing to read them. But I just like to have them, as my wife says. She's like, you're totally a dragon. You just don't do it. You don't care about money. She's like, the only thing you want money for is to buy more books so you can just hoard them. But I'm like, they look so nice though, you know?
Yeah, they do.
Well, Angela, I really appreciate you coming on. It was such a great, time talking to you. And I really look forward to, to reading your books. I do have book 1 on my Kindle. So as soon as I can kick my butt and finish the few book reviews that I have in between, I will definitely get to it. Before I do, I will let you know. That way you can be on the outlook for it. But I want to remind our audience, just don't forget all of Angela's socials and book links can be found in the description everywhere, wherever you're listening or watching this video or podcast. So make sure you click, go buy your books. And as always, please make sure to review any books from any author that you read, because that's really their lifeline to other readers and sales. So thank you so much, Angela. If there's anything else I can do for you, you just get a hold of me on TikTok, email, and I'll help you in any way I can.
Okay, thank you so much, Dan. It was fun.
Yeah, thank you so much. Anytime you want to come back, you let me know and we'll chat about mystery or thrillers, urban fantasy, whatever you want. So
okay, great. Thank you.
Not a problem, Angela. You have a great rest of the day and I'll talk to you later.
Okay, you too. Bye-bye.